panel discussion I have the honor and pleasure to run. To quote the title, we are going to focus on exhibitions at memorial sites and their impact on the Holocaust memory and education, an international perspective. And an international perspective we have here indeed, thanks to our incredible speakers. So let me welcome all of them. Ms. Adelina Hetnar from the Auschwitz Museum, Mr. Jacek Nowakowski from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. So we have the American perspective here. And we have, hopefully, two more speakers joining us remotely. So I would also like to welcome them, Mr. James Bulgin, curator of the Holocaust Galleries at the Imperial War Museum in London, so a British perspective, and Mr. Christian Dürr from the Mauthausen Memorial in Austria. So, yeah, are we all here? I hope so, at least. So thank you all for joining us. I would actually like to begin with a very brief quote. The Second World War and the Holocaust will soon pass out of living memory, leaving us without the first-hand testimony of veterans, eyewitnesses, and survivors. We need to preserve their stories and ensure the world never forgets what they experienced. And James, I would actually like to start with you because these are your words, to be honest. That essentially is the justification you have given to the audience for creating places like the Holocaust Galleries. And of course, we all share the same mission, but we represent different sides, as proven by the key lecture today by Professor Wójcicka. And the most fundamental difference between these sites, at least in my opinion, so the difference between sites like Majdanek, Auschwitz, Bełżec, Sobibór, and the museums like the one in Washington or the Holocaust Galleries or the Yad Vashem Museum, is the fact that some of them are spatially anchored at the actual Holocaust sites, while the others are not. So this, in my opinion, is the key difference here. But at the same time, let's be honest, they are all successful exhibitions, Holocaust exhibitions. So my question is, starting with James, does that location at the actual Holocaust site, that spatial anchoring, is it still relevant today if all of those exhibitions or museums are successful, or maybe it's no longer a relevant factor here?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. Firstly, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be involved. I
think it's really... can see you as well, so that's,
hello.
That's
awesome. I think it's really important. I think it's critical. I think if anything, well, I don't know if that will become more the case or less the case, but I don't think there's anything to suggest that it should diminish. I think that one of the things that we're really mindful of actually when we're working on the galleries at the museum is that we have a different sort of spatial relationship to the history, to a lot of the other places that we went to visit. And I think that spatial relationship is really critical. I think as Sophia covered off in her talk extremely well, that there is this question about what leads at the site. And I think at an authentic site, the site itself has to be the lead detail. And it's difficult because obviously having visited Bełżec and Sobibór and Treblinka and Majdanek and Auschwitz and Mali Trostenetz and all of these various different sites that have various different levels of remaining detail from the historic period. I think nevertheless the site has a sort of a significance and a potency that is the sort of the critical dimension within those places. I think for us, our subject position allowed us to come at the history slightly differently. Although actually the idea that is in any respect kind of objective in a sort of a Rankian sense is obviously not tenable either, because as a British museum we still have our own subject relationship to the history. It's just a different type of relationship. So I think, in fact, that's one of the things that we were trying to negotiate a little in the galleries with the use of the contemporary footage, this idea about space and relationships to space and what space and kind of spatial context means. So yeah, I do think it means a lot, and I think it's a really challenging proposition. It's something I thought a lot about over the last few years, where there are sites where very little remains, because I think that doesn't mean there's nothing. I think the fact that it's the place in the world still has a critical significance. It's just how you work with that to make that spatial relationship matter.
Mm-hmm. Adelina, I'm really interested in your opinion, because on the one hand you represent the actual site, right? So the Auschwitz memorial. On the other hand, we observe the traveling Auschwitz exhibition. So it's like, you know, being on both of those sides. So what's your input on this?
So I think that in both sides exhibitions can be successful, but the location of the exhibition is a very has a very great importance, because when we are creating exhibition in a non-historical site, we are guided by, I think, completely different rules when we are creating exhibition in non-historical, in historical site, in memorial site. And I think that the very good example here is our, I think, very well-known exhibition, which was created in cooperation of Auschwitz Memorial with Musealia, Auschwitz not long ago, not far away. And this exhibition was created to be shown beyond boundaries of the memorial site, and I think that this is the reason why this exhibition is so successful. But when we are talking about exhibitions in non-historical sites and in historical sites, we have to take into account several factors. So in general, museum exhibitions belong to so-called difficult exhibitions. They present very difficult topic. And I mean not only difficulties in representation, but also difficulties in understanding the exhibition. So because this exhibition also caused anxiety, and the viewer of the exhibition very often distances himself from the topic, and this creates even greater barrier in understanding of it. And another problem is that Holocaust exhibitions also allow people to very close identification with the victims, which may lead to secondary traumatization. And all these factors become even more stronger when we are talking about exhibition in authentic memorial sites, because this is the real place with real power and with the connection with the past. So I think that the location of the exhibition plays a huge role, and I think we have to take into account in what place we would like to present exhibition. And another thing is also about authenticity, because we are talking about objects, and there is, in opinion of museum historians, objects do not convey authenticity. The event, is conveying authenticity. So when we have objects, they need to be displayed in the context, and memorial site provides such context. So I think that the objects which are not explained to the visitors are not the evidences of the history, as Mr. Jacek told us before. So I think that the place is very relevant, and it's very crucial in the matter of creation of the exhibition, especially Holocaust exhibition.
Yes, and from this point we jump to Jacek, right? Because your institution proves that being anchored in the actual Holocaust site is irrelevant, because you can create a successful Holocaust museum without that.
With this. I think that if the sites didn't exist, the museums like ours, Imperial War Museum, Yad Vashem, would have no grounds for telling the stories. This is I firmly believe that the sites are the most important for that. The reasons that Adelina just said, that gives the context to the objects, also to the objects that are on display in our museum or Yad Vashem or other places. Without those sites, and I would expand it to not only the concentration camps or killing center sites, but also to the sites after the ghetto. You know, I just saw in Warsaw the results of their archaeological digs that they conduct next to the Mila 18 building, the basement, and this is quite an incredible. It's a material culture at its best, and it gives you the proper context in this. So I really believe that the strength of the actual sites is really very, very important. More to that, our museum, mainly for, I have to admit, for the fundraising reasons, we conduct tours for our donors for the last 15 years, I think. And I organize them usually both in Poland and in Germany. And for me, this is like an exhibition, that instead of going in the gallery, you go to the places. And you see the places and you get the context in it. Those tours are usually ending either in Auschwitz or in Berlin, depending on how we compose this thing. But that gives a real glimpse into that history in a more sense than the exhibition that is far away. And this is, I think, how our patrons understand it.
Mm-hmm. And as a follow-up, maybe, you have just sparked this idea, for me at least, for this question. So, should those exhibitions in those non-Holocaust sites like serve to the visitors on their own, or should they serve as an invitation to visit those actual sites? I mean, should they be like a fully independent narrative? You go visit the Holocaust Memorial in Washington and that's it. Or maybe like visiting the actual sites is essential.
I think that visiting actual sites is essential, and if the exhibition in the Yad Vashem or in Washington doesn't expire, inspired, it's not Freudian, I think. That's inspire the patrons to go and visit. It fails, I think, because this is the ultimate. I remember that we had years ago questions from our colleagues in the archives, because we are, other function that we do is that we are copying archives from all over the world. And some of the colleagues in different archives were saying, so if we give you our copies, who will come to us? And it was completely wrong, because the real researchers seeing the copies would want to go to a real archive and see the context and everything. So this is the same story with the authenticity cannot be replaced. That's my opinion.
Yes, I definitely agree, because exhibitions portraying the Holocaust, even one very rich in artifacts, can never have the same authority as the memorial site, I think, because of the authenticity, and the authenticity of the place allow us to get the perspective of the victims and maybe a little make the attempt to understand what happened to the exact place to the people. And it is important, I think, this experience of the place.
So maybe before we drift too far away, let's give a chance to Christian to say a word in this context. Are we? Yeah? Oh, hello. Good to see you. But we can't hear you for some reason.
Yeah, I should turn on my mic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for the invitation. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person, but I'm really glad to be at least present virtually and can participate in this discussion. Thanks for the invitation. As to your question, well, I'm working for the Mauthausen Memorial, which is a museum on a historic site. So I have to say that the location is essential, obviously. Which does not mean in any way that Holocaust museums on non-historic sites could not be successful. I think there are simply different requirements or means which allow one and the other museum to be successful or not. From our experience, I can say that visitors that come to Mauthausen, they don't go there in order to visit a museum. in order to see any exhibition, they go there to see the site as such. The site in terms of an abstract location, you could say, a scene of where a terrible crime had happened. And the site also in terms of the material remains which are there, which in case of Mauthausen are a rather good concern. So that's the actual motivation for most of the visitors to come to Mauthausen. So we have to see any exhibition that we do at Mauthausen as sort of an extension of such a visit to the original site, or maybe as kind of a follow-up to it. In practice, visitors who come to Mauthausen before they come to our museum building where the permanent exhibitions are, they actually have already walked through the compound of Mauthausen for at least 1 or 1.5 hours, be it on guided tour or be it self-guided by audio guides or our app. So they have already on their way through the compound learned a lot about the history of the site. And we don't need to start from zero in the museum. So the museum or the exhibition, the permanent exhibition for us, I would say serves different objectives. First of all, it tries to put all the information which visitors have already received on the way through the compound in a different context. While on the guided tour or on the self-guided tour, the information, historic information, is spatially organized, so to say, because it's always linked to a particular place on the site, be it the quarry, be it the former infirmary camp, be it whatever, you name it. So it's spatially organized, this kind of information. What the museum does, it puts apart this information again and puts it together in a different context, in a historic narrative context, be it a chronological or a structural one. The museum also serves to deepen the information, to give additional information, and it serves most of all also to make up a broader context, a broader historic context. So it not just tells about the history from, in case of Mauthausen, 38 to 45, but it puts the whole history of Mauthausen in the broader geographical and a broader historic context. So as to your question, I would say, once again, space is essential, but it's not a necessary requirement for a museum to be successful.
Mm-hmm. And now I have like a question, especially to you, Jacek, but if anyone else wants to jump in, just go ahead. Because you've co-created the exhibition here at the Bełżec Memorial, and you've also co-created the exhibition in Washington. So my question, at least very briefly, what is like the fundamental difference in creating exhibitions in those actual sites and the non-actual sites?
No, that it's a fundamental
like the key
difference.
Point,
the key point is the exhibition in Washington is trying to tell the very complicated story of the Holocaust in a very limited space, using a lot of shortcuts, a lot of omissions, a lot of I don't want to say the symbolic, because Scheike Weinberg hated that word. He always was saying that what is a symbol for one person means nothing for the other person, and he was right. But in a sense, somehow you have to present it in really bullets, in a bullet form. And it's because if you wanted to show all the aspects, it's just impossible. Whereas at the site, like in Bełżec, the main thing with the exhibition was that the site is the most important. Mm-hmm. And the exhibition is just an introduction and a reminder or something of that sort for the visitors to put it in the proper context. And the idea of the exhibition was, at least in our mind, that it should be for 10, 15 minutes the most. Because we want the visitors to go to the monument and have the experience and have everything in that. And this is the monument, to certain, Treblinka definitely is the most experiential monument, because the monument explains the whole territory and everything in it. Bełżec also does it, because he put the frame over the monument, and according to Andrzej Sołyga's word, he put the time frame into the crime for the first time. And that's I remember we had a discussion, because it was really very difficult to establish the chronology of the deportations. There is not enough documentation, etc. And we wanted to dissuade him from having this on the perimeter of the monument. And at some point he said, but that would be the first monument that will put the time frame to this crime. And we lost every argument, and we had to do a lot of shortcuts, etc. But going back to the exhibition, it's the exhibition in Sobibór definitely fulfills that role. It introduces everything, and it doesn't require someone to spend hours in studying, etc. And I think that that's what the intention in Bełżec was. You'll be the judge whether it was achieved, but we'll see.
All right, so moving on to another point, and we'll actually be going back to our key lecture once more, because today we've already seen a few examples of this, and we're going to talk about those museums outside the actual Holocaust sites again, because I, at least as a visitor, I've observed sort of a tendency to mimic, at least partially, that spatial anchoring, and I call it this way for the sake of the discussion, to give you a few more examples what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about, for example, putting up a prisoner's barrack in those non-actual sites. I'm talking about, for example, a shelter for hiding Jews that's displayed in the Schindler's factory in Krakow, right? It's not actually a Holocaust infrastructure per se, but it's related, right? So another example of mimicking that. Or maybe the cattle cars, right, that are displayed in various sites. I think we saw one in the photo of the Imperial War Gallery. There is one in Yad Vashem, of course. There is another one in Gdańsk in the World War II Museum. So my question to all of you, actually, because I'm curious about your opinions, how far can we actually go down this path? Like, how many things can we do in this way? And is there something that we shouldn't imitate, right? What's the boundary here?
Oh, it's a very difficult question, I think, but maybe I will go back to the objects, because as in Auschwitz Memorial, objects belonging to the Holocaust victims are usually everyday items, so they cannot tell us more than what they were created for. So I see here a great role of the curator of the exhibition, that is giving the explanation to the visitor, what is the object, what is the history of the object, etc. And it could mean that we can freely replace objects, yes, because we can explain everything. We can explain also copies. So maybe it is the way of constructing exhibitions, but I think that is not a good idea, because there is a strong belief in society that we cannot replace originals by imitations, due to the fact that original objects are connected to the history, and they have special power or special meaning, and they allow visitors for a unique experience when they are seeing original objects. So I think that there is a very thin boundary between, in what you said, that in placing imitations in the museums or replicas or maybe some other things. I think that we have to be very careful in doing these things, because when visitor see the imitation, it is he or she is not sure if this is the real object or the imitation. So I think that we should stick to the facts, to the authentic objects, and we have to tell the story of the survivors through these objects.
Because you're talking about objects in general,
Yeah, in
and
general.
I would like to ask specifically about imitating the camp infrastructure.
Camp
right?
infrastructure.
Because we've seen such examples, right?
Of course.
At the Holocaust Museum in Washington, you go through this Katlka and you see the photo of the selection at the end of the path. So how far can we go down this road, actually?
Can I come in on this?
Yeah. By all means, please do.
This is a subject really close to my heart. I think it's a really important one, and I think there is a really important tension that we need to acknowledge between the obligation, I think, that we do have to modify the claim as to what entering any of our sites can actually do in respect of giving us a meaningful insight into the kind of historic reality of the people involved. But at the same time, we need to be really mindful of not indulging that idea that somehow the Holocaust happened in a different vector of reality. When Hetnar talked about the idea of Planet Auschwitz, I think sometimes that idea can actually become really unhelpful too. So indulging the idea that somehow the events of the Holocaust were so far beyond our comprehensible reality that it's beyond us entirely. For us with the museum, with the galleries at the museum, we were extraordinarily mindful of this issue of not suggesting that in any respect visitors were getting any kind of experiential insight into the historic reality of the events themselves, because clearly that's absurd. And so I think that things like the train carriage, for example, as you say, we do have a train carriage, but the way that the train carriage is lit and positioned was very carefully intended not to suggest in any respect that the carriage was making a claim that visitors by through their encounter of it had a kind of a meaningful insight into the historic reality of the people within that position, but to acknowledge the fact that this history has had a material identity, of course it did, because it was part of the material physical world. And that's something which we thought about a lot. I think about it a lot in terms of affect, this idea of presenting the past as something which was real, tangible, physical, experienced, but not suggesting to visitors that through a representation of it, we're giving them direct access to it as an authentic experience themselves. That tension to me is productive, but it's also something to be really mindful of, because I think that if we're not mindful of moderating those claims, there is a danger that people, are encouraged to believe that they know or have kind of understood something more than it's possible for them to have understood, and it's a challenge. But like I say, for me, in the way that we engaged with what we were doing, we were existing between those two kind of poles, and it was the tension between those two things was our sort of active space.
Jacek, and what's your intake on this?
I think that the most important thing is the purpose, and I think that this is extremely difficult and almost unexplainable history. And if something in some gimmick or, for lack of better word, works to explain that history, it can be used, but to a degree that you control it, because you are on the edge of a kitsch with this. And I can give you an example. We did, in the beginning of 2000, we did an exhibition about the fate of children in the Łódź ghetto, very much based on the numerous interviews with the survivors who were children at that time, and using artifacts. The main artifact was an album that was we got on loan from YIVO in New York, and that album had the greeting, Rosh Hashanah greeting cards presented by children of the Łódź ghetto to Chaim Rumkowski. And based on that, we worked this whole story of what happened, the tragic fate of children. And one of the things that was really on our mind was that we could use the voices of the survivors, who were at that time around 90, 80. But the question was, what is more important? Retaining authenticity and having their real voices, or having a child reading that and presenting what a child would say. And we eventually went into the child actors, and it worked. It worked because it was, we presented in such way that it was attached to a real person, and it showed the real person, but it showed that person being 90 years old or etc. So it was kind of obvious for the visitors to listen to children. So I think that you cannot make the general statement on that, but whatever works for the purpose of teaching or of explaining is, I think that can be used. It's to a degree, of course.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Christian, to wrap up this question.
If you're talking, for example, can you hear me, right? Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just going back to the example of the cattle car, for example, I think it's a crucial difference if you're talking about the reconstruction of a cattle car or an actual cattle car from that time being displayed in one or the other museum. So we, as a museum and as a memorial site, we have the really very strict policy of preserving the documentary character of the site as evidence. So as far as it is possible, and up to now it's been possible in almost all cases, we are trying to avoid any forms of reconstruction on the site or even in the expositions. I think this is a crucial approach for an authentic site as Mauthausen is. I also understand, on the other hand, that approaches of museums such as the US Holocaust Memorial Museum or some other museums on non-historic sites obviously can be different ones. But we have this very strict policy of not using reconstructions for the sake of the documentary character of the site. This is one thing which I wanted to say. I also can give an example for it. After the liberation of Mauthausen, survivors from the Czechoslovakia at that time took many original objects from the camp and brought it to Czechoslovakia. Crucial objects, important objects, such as parts of the crematorium oven, for example, or some technical parts of the gas chamber, etc. And some of these objects have been displayed in the decades after the war in several expositions. In '47, for example, in Prague, and in the '60s in the Czech Republic. So you practically had a form of reconstruction of the Mauthausen crematorium oven, composed of some original parts of this oven in the Terezín Memorial close to Prague. This is obviously legitimate, and it served at that time an important purpose to, so to say, to transmit this history of the Mauthausen concentration camp and its Czechoslovakian victims among the Czechoslovak population. However, we thought when we made the new exhibitions in Mauthausen in 2013 that these objects actually would have a better place back on their original site, which is the concentration camp Mauthausen, or the nowadays memorial site of Mauthausen. So we finally agreed on a permanent loan with the Terezín Memorial to have those objects back in Mauthausen, and they now form part of our permanent exhibitions on the site. And both of us, we as well as our colleagues from Terezín, think that it's the actual adequate place to display them.
Mm-hmm. And the next question, maybe we'll stick to you, Christian, and start with you this time. I would like to, on the one hand, on a similar note, on the other, to kind of take a step back. And I would like to ask each and every one of you, is there, in your opinion, anything that you believe should never find its way onto a Holocaust exhibition? I'm kind of curious. Or never say never.
Yeah, never say never, I would say. But I mean, obviously, I suppose most of us will agree on the fact that atrocity images are, by the least, problematic. And it's been obviously in the focus of international discussions on how to deal with atrocity images. As we heard before, also in the speeches before, particularly in German and also in Austrian, because Austria in some way is always a form of an extension of Germany. So we have the same cultural background in a way. And in exhibitions in Germany and Austria, the use of atrocity images is very reduced and mostly non-existent. I think this is important for two different reasons. Because for pedagogic reasons, because shock, which might be caused by atrocity images in a pedagogic sense, is not helpful, just right on the contrary. So it leads rather to a withdrawal of visitors or of people who want to talk to them, to an engagement. And on the other hand, it has already been mentioned, we want to avoid humiliation of victims that have already been humiliated, and we want to avoid secondary traumatizations. Having said this, I think anyway, nowadays in the present, we will have to think about particularly before the background of increasing distortion and relativization of Holocaust, for example, we must find means of how to deal with this horror, which is behind this history, also in exhibitions about the Holocaust, be it on-site or off-site. And in this context, I think we have to reconsider once again how to deal also with these very difficult forms of documents that are atrocity pictures, atrocity footage, etc. So with regard to your question, I would indeed say never, and I couldn't think of anything which I would definitely exclude from being displayed in such kinds of museums.
Mm-hmm. Adelina, do you agree?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that it is not the question what we should not present on the exhibition, but the question is how we should present certain difficult topics connected to the history, especially to the history of the Holocaust. I think that it is something completely inappropriate to use, to treat the victims instrumentally, because the exhibition should somehow give the respect to the victims, restore the memory of the victims by giving back the identity to the victims that the perpetrators wanted to erase. And I think this is the crucial thing. And also the question of using photographs taken in the killing sites is difficult, because I think that we should show the history from the perspective of the victims, not from the perspective of the perpetrators, which is very important. We should present the victims in the very wide perspective. We should present them to the visitors as a human beings, that they have their own life before the Holocaust and what happened to them maybe after the Holocaust, especially to those who managed to survive, how they deal with this difficult past. And this is, I think, the crucial thing, issue here, especially in the context of the Holocaust exhibitions.
Jacek, you have tremendous collections in the Chapelle Center, and I'm sure that there is just at least one object in there that you know that is there, but you think that maybe let's not put it on display for some reason.
There are several objects like that, and I must say that the one that I remember, it's a tragic story if you think about it. We got a very cryptic and very strange-sounding letter, mainly saying that my mother-in-law has a tattoo from Auschwitz, and she wants to remove it. and give it to you, to the museum. And I just didn't know what to answer, etc. And next letter was that she removed it and I'm sending it to you. And so we have in the formaldehyde tattoo, and I know that definitely for this generation and my children and grandchildren, it won't be on display. Maybe in the future, I don't know. But what Adelina said, that to giving the humanity to the person. So if, let's say that tattooed skin will be put on display, it will have to be explained together with what the trauma that was. Because the last letter from that lady was that I had it, I was unhappy, I was removing, I was unhappy. Now that I don't have it, I'm still unhappy. So it didn't solve anything, and I'm sorry. And she had to spend a lot of money because that's for the doctor, etc. You know. So we have this kind of objects that, you know, are not taking them, it would be wrong decision, right? Because they illustrate something. It's, for instance, you know, there is this whole category of objects of that sort that I know that they would never be put on display. And I think I agree that anything that will be degrading to the victims should not be put on display. If there is some important educational purpose of putting the photograph of emaciated bodies or the piles of bodies, I think that can be. But if just for the sake of putting this, I would never.
Yes, I agree fully. And James, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Interesting to hear about the tattoo, actually, because we were offered one of those recently as well. And it's interesting because as a default position, sometimes I think the assumption is that you sort of follow the intentions of the donor or the, you know, the family. And in this respect, actually, it was one of those moments where we found ourselves in opposition because the family would have wanted to donate the tattoo on the condition that it would be displayed. So it was very much something that, you know, was a positive choice on their part. They felt that came from a position of strength. From my perspective, I can't foresee any circumstances under which that would be anything other than something which was just macabre and just indulged all the kind of the wrong, you know, dimensions of the history. And I can't see a way of contextualizing that in a way which is sufficiently meaningful. I think in respect to the broader issue, actually, it brings us back slightly to the very first question you asked about the distinction between a memorial site at a location and a museum at a distance. I mean, one of the things actually which probably makes us distinct versus my other colleagues on the panel is that IWM is not a memorial museum. In fact, it's very explicitly not a memorial museum. It's something which has always been very important to the trustees and the sort of foundational directors. And so in some respects, it means that we operate under a slightly different kind of set of assumptions and criteria. And I think, you know, that relates, I suppose, to things like perpetration as well. I think one of the things with the galleries, which we thought was quite important, is that visitors understood that there was agency amongst perpetrators and that you know, that they acted sort of knowingly and in many respects willingly, which is not something which a lot of our visitors understand. And I can see that at a memorial site, then it wouldn't necessarily be the most appropriate place to deal with some of those issues, but also in terms of, you know, the issue of atrocity imagery, as we call it. And I completely agree with everything that my colleagues on the panel have said. But you know, we had this conversation about the use of that imagery, and then kind of did a lot of consultation and did a lot of thinking about it, and eventually decided that we would wanted to use this imagery, but it's exactly as Christian said, not to kind of instrumentalize it or to turn it into something which is used to present, you know, to precipitate or manipulate an emotional response of shock or outrage or something like that. So we made this decision to only display images of atrocity which were perpetrated derived of that nature at their original historical dimensions. So they're presented as kind of historic, tangible artifacts that had a kind of a material presence in the historic past. So there wasn't this, you know, the subjective wasn't to sort of drive this emotional response. And I think in that respect, I think that this is where the sort of the nuance in these things is important. It's about the strategies that you use and the context that applies to them. That said, to speak to your original question, I think, like I said, I can't anticipate any circumstances under which we would display something like the tattoo, or indeed, to be honest with you, any kind of human remain of any nature, not least because of halakha and all of the considerations arising from that. But I just can't, as you say, never say never, but I just can't imagine any contextual circumstances where that felt necessary. So I would say that would be kind of probably a pretty defined red line.
I would like to pull a different thread here, because you focused on the issue of not showing the macabre things, right? I was kind of thinking quite recently, actually, about the present context and the revisionists and straightforward deniers. So do you think maybe that, you know, the materials produced by them should ever find its way onto a proper Holocaust exhibition, is kind of to counter those theories? Or maybe not. Ha, I surprised you.
I saw it a bit, but I am not sure if we should present something like that on the exhibition, but for sure we can educate about that through lectures or additional workshops, or introduce this topic in a different way. But on the exhibition, the memorial set, I am not sure, maybe temporary one, but but I think it should be discussed, and it is the material very good for the workshop or lecture, but I don't think it is good to present it on the exhibition, especially in the original Holocaust.
Jacek not, so he agrees fully, I guess.
I think that we should not give any certain distinction to the deniers or revisionists. And, you know, when our museum opened in '93, you know, that's, I just want to put it in the perspective. In '93, when we opened, I thought that the Holocaust will have its 15 minutes, and it's last until today, so it's the thing. But some wise reporter from the Washington Post took one of the deniers through the exhibition, and I remember, for instance, that the denier was saying some absurd things in presence of shoes. You know, of course, it's the provenance. We got them from Majdanek, so those shoes are authentic, etc. But he was questioning what are those shoes. So I don't think that this is like my friend Michael Berenbaum is saying, that those are the flat earth society. There is no way that we will ever persuade them to think otherwise. And I think that just to build an exhibition or anything other than, like Adelina said, some educational programs, it's just counterproductive. It's you won't change them, and you always have those, as they call the useful idiots, like that reporter from the Post who just thought that he will prove something with this, and it's just impossible. It's completely absurd, the conversation with most of those people.
Okay, so now I would like us to jump onto a different thing, and I would like to ask you about the thing all exhibition curators love, so the multimedia. We all love them, the visitors love them, I guess, and we love them for the very reason that you can squeeze so much information in there, while we all lack space, always, we do. I just want to ask you about your opinion, what's the future of those measures? Because I get the impression that we are so bombarded with tech and multimedia all the time that they are becoming more and more obsolete within those sacred exhibition spaces. Of course, they will always be there, but maybe not to such an extent as they used to be put. What's your take on this? Yeah.
So broadly understood, multimedia have been part of the museum exhibitions, Holocaust museum exhibitions, for years. But I think that the question for now is how we should use maybe new technologies in education about our Holocaust, in education about World War II atrocities, because now we are facing a very quick development of new technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, or even different applications for online sightseeing. So, and I think that we have to broadly discuss how to use them and where are the limits of this kind of tools. Because I think that multimedia are present. They were present. They are still present in the exhibitions. It's something which is not new for us right now. We use them very widely, and I don't know if they support exhibitions or not, because I think that there is a lot of problems with multimedia on exhibitions too. They are broken all the time. They cost a lot, etc. And in fact, I think that in the memorial site, exhibition should not overshadow the original memorial site. Should be secondary, maybe not so full of multimedia. And I will probably pay more attention to new technologies today.
James, could we hear from you now?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. It's the sort of the instinct of most curators in the process is to think, if I can't find anywhere else to put it, I'll bury it in an AV, and that's the sort of the easiest strategy to deal with things. In fact, it's something I said to my team at the start. We're only going to use an AV if we've thought around this thing completely and exhaustively, and we genuinely can't think of anything else. That's the only time that we turn to the AV. I mean, I think in terms of the way that we use the AV in the galleries, I suppose it's relatively unusual because, as Sophia was saying earlier, there's none of our AVs are kind of standalone. It's the whole piece is sort of fully integrated. So we try to think about them differently. I think. As is ever the case, it's the question of saying, what is it that you're actually seeking to achieve? I think if it's just trying to use it as a means to an end or a sort of an easy response to something, then it's never going to be particularly satisfactory. It's the same with interactive technology as well, actually. Exactly as Adelina's just said, there's the issue with kind of maintenance and all that. But also, I found myself a lot earlier on, people would say, oh, you want to use interactives? And I said, well, why? And they said, because people like them, because they interact with them. And I thought, well, but if it could be anything, if it was like just something of putting like, balls in a basket, just if it's just about interacting for the sake of interacting, it's meaningless. If there's a genuine reason for doing it, if the interactivity genuinely meaningfully speaks to the content or something that you're trying to do, then it might be worth exploring. But funnily enough, we ended up not using any interactive audio visuals, not because I was sort of morally or ethically opposed to them. Just in the final reckoning, we just couldn't find a satisfactory reason for doing it. But had we found a satisfactory reason for doing that, then we would have done. So I think one needs to be really careful with them. I also think that maybe there's the capacity for them to be slightly more dynamic and interesting than they have been perhaps traditionally. And I suppose one of the things which I really don't understand, and I've never particularly, well, I understand now less than I did. I understand it more 30 years ago, is when the multimedia pieces in galleries become sort of mini documentaries. So visitors stop and watch something for about 20 minutes in the same way that they would if they were at home. And I think, well, then why are they here? They could do that at home. There's no point in being in the space to do that unless it's working as a fully effective, integrated part of the entire piece. That makes no sense to me. So I suppose that's something we're really mindful of. I also think, and I know this is the sort of thing you say when you reach a certain age, but I think that attention spans are undoubtedly getting lower. And one of the things we found is that AV pieces, if they were there at all, needed to be about 2.5 minutes long in order for them to sort of do what they needed to do. So that introduces a load of kind of practical things as well. So I think it's one of those things that I think for me, museum practitioners need to exercise a lot of kind of self-discipline in the way that they use them and anticipate their use as well.
I'm glad you mentioned interactivity because I have a very specific question regarding this in a minute. And right now I would like to hear from Christian because on the Mauthausen website you very much emphasize the importance of multimedia at the museum.
You got me on the wrong foot. Yeah, that's in fact true. It has to do with the corona and the pandemic, actually, when the museum was closed for a long time and we had to find ways on how to reach out to the public while the public could not visit Mauthausen. I think these are really two different things, and I very much agree to what James just said. I don't see the use of multimedia, interactive multimedia, virtual reality, you name it, so much in the context of a museum. So whatever you can do at home, do it at home. The museum, in my opinion, is there for other things. In our particular case, we focus on the objects as witnesses and of traces of history. So this is in the focus of our expositions. The usage of multimedia in our exposition or in our museum is very reduced. We use it only for video clips of survivors' testimonies. We have quite a few of them, but these are clips of a duration of between 2 and 3 minutes. And they are always contextualized within a part of the exhibition. They connect to particular objects. They connect to particular texts in the exhibition. So those clips it wouldn't make sense to watch them at home. So you have to see it in the context of the exhibition. And that's why we use multimedia on a very reduced level in this context. But moreover, apart from that, there is almost no multimedia in our expositions. Multimedia, though, as an outreach to a general public via internet, via our website, or via other platforms that we are running, for example, the virtual guide, is some other issue. And I would say, and this is in my thinking, not connected to the work we are doing as curators at the exhibitions. However, having talked badly about virtual reality, I have to say that in the future we will probably have to consider, or at least look for inspiration how to appropriately use augmented reality. I think augmented reality is still some other issue than virtual reality. At the present, we are in the process of developing a rather new memorial site at the site of the former concentration camp Goose, and the particular characteristics of this site is that there's almost nothing left of what used to be the camp. And in this context, I think augmented reality the technology of augmented reality could be a good approach to make readable, visible for visitors of the site what is not there anymore. That will certainly happen that within the next month and years we will be looking for inspirations, and maybe whenever the site is finished, we will be able to see some kind of augmented reality application. But as also James said, it depends very much on the context in what you want to use virtual reality or AV in general. AV and virtual reality as such, augmented reality as such, doesn't have any meaning at all. It only gets its meaning within a particular context.
And now I would like to ask you about a very specific example of an interactive multimedia. If we take a step outside the Holocaust museums and go into the domain of, generally speaking, historical museums, in some of them you can encounter some, stands or panels where you can play various games. Usually quizzes, right? Some visitors can even compete between each other and so on. And while I guess for the overwhelming majority of us that's something unthinkable to install at the museum, I'm curious about your opinions. Do you think such a measure or maybe a similar one will ever find its way onto a Holocaust exhibitions or museums in general?
So I think that the place is very relevant here. So I don't think that this is a very good solution to use interactive games on the grounds of the memorial site, because it was told today probably that grounds of the memorial sites contains victims' ashes, human remains, so they are most like cemeteries. And I think that this is something inappropriate to use interactive games and to somehow entertain people by using these tools. But I think that games can be very useful educational tool which can support preparatory procedure for the visit to memorial sites, for example, in the classroom or somewhere else, but I think not in the grounds of the memorial site.
But how about those museums that are not in the actual Holocaust sites? Is it permissible there?
You know, when I think about games, I see user who is playing a role. And I think playing roles in Holocaust education is not a good idea, because we are against of playing roles, because we can make attempt to understand the history, what happened to the victims, but we can never feel like them. So I think it is something which is inappropriate, and that is, of course, my opinion. Maybe my other speakers will disagree with me, but
I'm curious about Christian's opinion, because not that long ago you said never say never.
never say never.
Yeah, well, never say never. I still keep up with this motto. But in this case, I would have to say, I think we can discuss about the educational value, the possible educational value of video games. I'm not an expert on this, but even if there is one, I don't see why they should be played in an exhibition or in a museum. Play them at home and the educational value will be the same. So it's not that I would not want to see these kind of elements there in such kind of museum. It's rather that I don't see the sense of them being there.
Yeah, and James? Maybe let's stick to, like, generally speaking, quizzes. Maybe let's not go down deep into the video game domain, but let's focus on quizzes, like a simple thing.
I mean, I suppose I'd agree with Christian. I'd have to say never, but it's one of those things that I've seen, you know, read various papers on, seen various presentations on, and I'm yet to find anything which I would consider to be sort of appropriate or satisfactory. I can't imagine it ever appearing in the in the actual galleries proper. It seems to me that some of these things are sometimes built on a bit of a logical fallacy to say, oh, you know, people like quizzes and games, people come to the galleries, ergo we should put those two things together. And I'm just not sure that when you actually sort of interrogate the rationale behind doing so, it actually makes sense. Because the reason that people like doing quizzes isn't necessarily the reason they're interested in subjects or come to the galleries, etc. So I think, I mean, interestingly, for our learning program at the museum, there is a kind of an app-based tablet that the school groups use when they come around the galleries, but it's been very carefully formulated to sort of almost add a layer of curation to curate their visit. And there are kind of interactive elements within that, etc. But I wouldn't describe it as a quiz. So those elements work, but again, it's within a very kind of structured framework. So it's students come in, they have a half-hour session with a practitioner or an hour with a practitioner. They go around the galleries using this thing, then they come back and they kind of debrief on it. So it's not something which is just a sort of standalone thing by itself. So I would say, as you say, I mean, games, that feels to me as if it's harder to understand, but quizzes, never say never, but I can't quite see it.
Okay, my final question to every one of you, and let's start with you, Jacek. It's a very practical one. I would like to ask you what, in your opinion, and by what I mean anything, has like the greatest impact on the visitors at your exhibitions, and why, if possible?
We did, you know, it's an easy answer. We did several surveys, opinion surveys, and the Majdanek shoes were always number one. In this, I think that the Tower of Faces, the Eshishki Tower, is another one. And those were usually two things that were both of them authentic objects. I mean, the photographs in Tower of Faces, but very well documented. And this is a story. The Majdanek shoes, it was always the biggest impact in it. Going back to the previous question, because I didn't express, my opinion is never. Never, definitely. I don't see anything that you would, it's just a tool, you know? And I don't see anything that you would achieve by having any quizzes or anything. I cannot even imagine anything of that sort being appropriate to the story that we are telling and this. So I think that having said this, going back to your next question, sorry, jumping, It's, you know, the public opinion quizzes always miss something because very often it depends on, you know, how you ask the question. Let's be frank about this. And I think that having the observations and going with different people of different sorts, different generations through the exhibition, I think that everybody is hit by something, but it's a completely different thing. The same happens to those who visit Treblinka, Sobibór, Auschwitz, Majdanek, etc. They are hit definitely by something, but you never know. It is very personal experience, and you cannot repeat this. And I think that it's good that it is this way because it is deeper than anything else.
Okay, Christian, maybe your turn. But that's the last question, so.
Okay. Well, if we speak of Mauthausen as the whole place, let's say the memorial site, the whole compound, the historic structure, the material remains of the camp, plus the museum, then I have to say what attracts people most, what attracts visitors most are obviously the historic remains, particularly those that express a certain, I'm sorry for this term, I have to use it anyway, that express a certain aura or that carry a certain aura. These are places like, for example, the shower rooms, the crematoriums, obviously, also the prison of Bełżec. I think these are the places that have most impact on visitors. Secondly, we have certain commemorative areas on the site, for example, in the former crematorium #1, where people, families or communities have left individual commemorative plaques over the years and decades in honor of persons who perished at Mauthausen and were burned in those crematorium ovens. So you have many plaques with names, and many of them also with photographs with eyes of people assassinated at Mauthausen looking at you. This has a lot of impact on visitors as well. I have to add here that this is nothing curated at all. This is a room that really came to life spontaneously because over the decades people just left plaques there. So those commemorative spaces are also our so-called Room of Names, which is actually inspired by the Hall of Names at Yad Vashem. And only in third place, I could talk about particular items or particular objects or parts of the museum as such, of the exhibition. So this is also to say that, once again, what I said in the beginning, what attracts people to Mauthausen, the reason why visitors come to Mauthausen is mostly the historic place, the place of commemoration, and only in second or maybe third place, the museum as such.
Mm-hmm. And James, moving to you, but you can pick one thing only.
I mean, I don't, very much like Jacek, I don't think there kind of is one, because it's just not how the galleries are constructed. But one overriding sentiment that visitors have expressed, interestingly, in the various evaluations that we've done, is a sense of the humanness of the people who were targeted. One of our kind of big mantras with the project is that the history needed to be presented as something that was done by people to people. I think our concern was that a lot of Holocaust representation had kind of favoured or indulged the sense that the whole thing had become so systemised and mechanistic that it was almost kind of faceless and anonymous, and that it was all done under the auspices of something which was almost kind of automated, rather than it being a deeply and intensely human history. And so, but within that, there was this real concerted and consolidated effort to make sure that all of the Jewish individuals who appeared within the galleries appeared as a kind of a diverse, pluralistic, individual group of individuals, and that seems to have come out really consistently. That the fact that it exactly as you heard from Sophia earlier, that the objects just kind of sit amongst the other thing in the world, so it feels of the world, and the people feel like people, and that's something which has been really consistently featured in the evaluation we've done. So I suppose that it's not one specific moment, but it's a kind of a more general piece of consistent feedback.
And how about you, Adelina?
So Auschwitz is obviously a symbol of the Shoah. So our visitors primarily would like to learn more about Auschwitz as a center of mass extermination of Jews, and that is why they want to see the evidences of crime. So for especially belongings of the Jewish victims, which are clear evidences of what happened at Auschwitz. Victims here, this is something that people somehow associate with Auschwitz. And of course, historical exhibitions not so important. The most important are the original places like of course, block number 11, the death wall, the gates of Auschwitz, which are iconic. But unfortunately, also mass culture somehow shapes the taste of the visitors. They very often, what is in films, what is in books, they want to see that. So they are asking questions right now because of the newest film, The Zone of Interest, about perpetrators' life in Auschwitz, about gardens of Rudolf Höss. But what is unchangeable, they want to see the original memorial site and they want to learn more about it.
Jacek, I have to admit that as a long-time employee of Majdanek, we have the same thing, Majdanek shoes. So we agree on this. So thank you very much. That's all from me. Thank you for your participation. I think we have like a few minutes for some potential questions, if there are any. Yes?
Do I need a microphone? This is really a broader question about context. Put very simplistically, the Holocaust was about Jews and anti-Semitism. But I think the goal, often maybe more implicit, is to say there should be lessons one derives from learning about the Holocaust that have relevance today. I think some museums really try to take you there. I mean, one example, the Belgian Museum in Mechelen has a kind of core exhibit about the Holocaust. It is a historic site, but then it really broadens it to talking about apartheid and other racism in America, other broader examples. I spoke at a Holocaust commemoration event in Dublin in 2016 on International Holocaust Commemoration Day, and the backdrop for everyone speaking was a blown-up picture of a little Syrian refugee boy who had washed up on the shore of a Greek island. You may have recalled that. That seemed to symbolize then the tragedy going on in the war in Syria. So that dominated what was to be a day of commemoration of the Holocaust. So my question is, to what degree are you concerned about this? Do you want to lead visitors to drawing analogies to more current situations? Is there a danger? Obviously, I feel there is, that the particularist aspect of the Holocaust can sometimes be totally lost by trying to convey universal lessons. It can even be twisted. Certainly what's going on these days is a suggestion that genocide is taking place somewhere else in the world and the perpetrators are themselves the Jewish people. So again, I don't know to what degree this comes up in your design of museums and the educational components of that, or something you see as a prospect for the future.
I can say that, I mean, it's a different story because, for instance, we have a special, the whole office, the whole department dealing with the contemporary genocides, and we have colleagues who travel the world. We prepared some sort like a kit that would if applied would tell whether the given event should be categorized as a genocide or not, etc. So we are doing this, but the big question is whether the sites like Mauthausen or Auschwitz. Auschwitz Museum had a conference in 2007, and I think that one of the keynote speakers was Elie Wiesel. in the beginning, and Ellie said from the outset that this is the place to shout about it, but not place to deal with, research it, etc. That was the opinion, and I think that the majority of the people, if I remember well, had this opinion that Auschwitz is definitely the background to talk about all those issues, but not necessarily place to do this in it. I don't know how in other places.
So we don't compare Holocaust to other genocides. We try to just show people that the mechanisms that leads to the Holocaust they can be compared. And I think that our role is to evoke empathy toward our visitors, because I think that the empathy is the key to shape society, very responsible, democratic, open. Maybe this is something not very, how to say it, but I think this is the key of our educational role in the museum. Of course, our education in our museum is divided into two different streams. We have this general education. Our guides are talking about the history of Auschwitz, but we have also this in-depth education. And here in that field of the in-depth education, we try to introduce a broader perspective. We are doing workshops, and we work with the Holocaust as a event that is so important to understand human behaviors. So I think this is our educational here. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions, maybe? Okay, if not, thank you so much for your contributions.